Greetings, fellow Americans. Welcome to Fireside Chats, State of Our Nation. I am Susanna Tanner, your host, candidate for House of Representatives 2026 and President 2028. So we're going to talk about a couple of pieces of legislation, just some examples that Bob Ferguson, governor of Washington, has signed into law here recently. Some of these are pretty interesting. One that I wanted to point out especially has to do with rental increases and such. So reading this legislation, this is through the Washington State Congress. There's a section that is describing what residential areas are exempt from this cap on rental increases, which is 7% plus the what do you call it? Excuse me. It's 7% plus inflation, if I'm not mistaken. Plus the consumer price index is exactly how it's worded in the legislation, or 10%, whichever is less. So the problem with that is that 7% is actually a lot. If you are, let's do some calculations real quick. If you are paying $1,000 a month and you get a 7% increase, 7% is like an additional $70. That's quite a bit, especially for low income houses. So then you end up paying an additional $70 on top of your $1,000 that you're used to paying. That 70 could go for utilities, it could go for a phone bill, it could go for food, which is essential to keeping tenants. If you don't have people who are able to eat, you're not going to keep tenants. Like, it's just not affordable that way. Unfortunately, with that particular aspect of the bill, it is going to make things a bit harder for people who don't live in certain areas like low-income housing. It still gives landlords a bit of an increase. Unfortunately, like I said, it's not always going to be affordable, and if you're paying even more than that, that percent, even though that percent remains the same, the amount that a person is being charged extra does change, and it's not going to really help our communities. A couple of things on that. At least one thing on that is that one of the ways that we can lower housing costs is reducing the interest that the federal government charges for loans. If they're going to continue to charge almost 5%, 6% for getting a loan through the government at all, that's where our Treasury and our some of our other government agencies come in. They're going to continue to pass along all of that to the tenants. And it's going to make it increasingly difficult for people who have low income to be able to afford housing, adequate housing. So, with that in mind, that is one aspect of the rental cap that they were talking about. But it also, how do I say this? Let me read this paragraph to you. A landlord, this is in Section 102 of Washington State's House Bill 1217. Section 102. A landlord may increase rent in an amount greater than allowed under Section 101. That's the initial section I was talking about with the cap of this act, only as authorized by the exemptions described in Section 102, the current section. Rent increases, this is the big one, are not limited by Section 101 of this act for any of the following types of tenancies. A tenancy in a dwelling unit for which the first certificate of occupancy was issued 12 or less years before the date of the notice of the rent increase. So basically, if you've been living there longer than 12 years, then you are pretty much exempt from that increase. A tenancy in a dwelling owned by a public housing authority or public development authority, a nonprofit. Now, some of those agencies, like nonprofits, they have their rents regulated by other laws. So I can understand why those wouldn't be included. But public housing and public development authorities, that is basically allowing those particular agencies to increase rent on people who are already struggling. If you're in public housing, you're probably of really low income, and that basically gives them the ability to increase those rents on individuals who can't really afford it. So with this particular bill, it's going to be really, really tough to really accept that this bill is passed. There's definitely some different ways that this could have gone. Just specifically with the the tenancies, the different types of dwelling units that they're talking about. There's no reason why those particular development authorities or housing authorities should be able to raise rent on those who are low income. And even if there are other laws that govern the rent increases and such, this bill still gives those agencies the ability to raise rent on people who can't really afford it. Just some things to think about with our current state of the union in Washington anyway. So there's also another bill. This is House Bill 1296, or Senate Bill, I'm sorry, Senate Bill 1296. This one has to do with education and rights. Now, looking at this particular piece of legislation, I obviously have some concerns. So, there are some rights that are established in this particular piece of legislation that are rights of students, and I think they're great, but they're really incomplete. Students have a lot more rights that really need to be defined, in my opinion. What I've seen in this particular bill is that it's definitely establishing some criteria that needs to be met for our education curriculum for our schools. It is changing some of the wording that's already there to include more avenues for resources and such. It's also establishing more parental rights with this bill. So, one of the things that I wanted to point out about this bill specifically was one of the rights of students. Now, it does say in here that discrimination is prohibited, and it defines discrimination. It also defines um, certain terms like gender identity, uh, and includes those it includes those terms in the types of discrimination that are prohibited. Now, the right of students to learn in a safe environment, supportive of learning and free from harassment, from intimidation or bullying. That is one of those that is clearly defined as a right for our students, and it is a right. There is a problem with bullying in school, and I think a lot of that has to do with how we're teaching our students in various settings. Excuse me. All right. The right to access the academic environment free of that discrimination, to exercise their freedoms, protected freedoms under the United States Constitution and our state constitution. These are all really important, and our students need to be taught these rights when they're in school. One of the things that I would like to see is an establishment of a standard curriculum for our public schools in this state. Something that all of our school districts abide by. They're teaching the same thing to all of our students. Making sure that all of our students have access to these rights, have access to people who understand how these rights can be interpreted, understanding how to teach our students how to live by these rights. Whenever I was growing up and in elementary school, we were taught things like this. I'm not sure if it was part of the curriculum, but that was kind of my experience with my early education. We were taught, that we have the right to seek out a counselor if we needed to, and there was always one available at our school. We could talk to the teachers. We had the right to access them. And we were taught that it was important for us to actually, make the move, initiate that conversation, say, hey, I need this. We were taught that. And it was just kind of little things, just little ways that our teachers implemented those types of learning. And they're very effective. It can happen with any situation. So being able to regulate all of that across the state, I think would really benefit our people. It would really inform them better. We would, all of our students would be learning the same basic curriculum. And then, of course, there would be individualized curriculum for students, progressing through certain avenues, certain subjects and whatnot in school. Now, there are a lot of other pieces of legislation that have gone along with this particular piece being signed by the governor and implementing those after a certain date. I believe that this one is June 1st, which is today. Happy June, by the way. So, as far as those go, there's some things that are, I think a lot of us can agree that we're just we're iffy on. And that's understandable. If we're just going to, jump to conclusion one way or another about how something's going to turn out, it could backfire on us. But these pieces of legislation are a step in the right direction. Making sure that our state is getting the ball rolling, that we're regulating, that we're being responsible about our rights and freedoms, that we are making sure our students are taken care of, making sure that our people are being taken care of, that we're not overcharging for rent, for groceries, for basic necessities. These are all important. And it's really important for us to keep track of what um, our local state and county, city elected officials are doing, keeping up with the legislation and whatnot. For those of us who feel like we have the time anyway. And it's important for us to make sure that we speak to our legislators, even if it's something that has to do with your local environment, like in your city. Making sure that your legislators know, the lawmakers know, that this could happen, or this is why you feel that this is not going to work, why you believe that a piece of legislation is not going to be legal, or if it's unconstitutional, one way or the other. It is important for us to do this. And we are starting to speak out a lot more, not just here in Washington, but all across our nation, which is very good. It's our right to speak up. It's our right to say, hey, this is not right. This isn't going to work. We know this isn't going to work. In that way, I think that the people, as a collective even, have a much better sense of what is going to work for our nation and what is not. Now, I have seen, of course, a lot of headlines, and just so y'all know, I happen to post comments on Newsbreak a lot. It's just kind of a one-stop shop for news, and I follow a lot of different people there. It's not the only place that I use for news, but I do a lot of posting on there, and you can follow me on Newsbreak. I do try to share a lot of those posts with my other social media, and they're not always compatible, but you can find me on Newsbreak. I do do that. There's another little notice I'd like to give out. After June 22nd, as of June 22nd, Fireside Chat Live will be on YouTube. We're going to be going to YouTube because it's a lot easier for me to get on the live stream there. It doesn't have quite as many problems with downloading the videos. And I happen to like YouTube. I like Google. I think it's a pretty good little place. I also use YouTube to get a lot of my visual news. I watch news broadcasts. I watch podcasts from various different sources. And so it's also kind of a one-stop shop for a lot of news. There's quite a bit that's out there. Sometimes it's hard to follow all of it, but I see the headlines and I see articles, and I do watch a lot of different stuff. I do a little bit of research to verify things if I think something's a little fishy. And I also, whenever I hear about legislation on these different social media, I tend to make sure that I'm sharing my thoughts and stuff with people who are also reading these articles and watching these podcasts. So we're going to be moving to YouTube. The link will be in the invitation that you receive if you are being invited. Otherwise, it'll be posted with my notice, my posts for my page and my other social media on Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. So, as of then, we'll be going to, as of the 22nd, we will be on YouTube. And the fireside chats will continue. I'll still have the event posted on my Facebook so that the link will be easily accessible to all of my people who like to watch. That's all I have for today. Thank you for your time, and may our path lead to peace and prosperity.